All right, so everyone's been wondering, how viable is Titanic II, the project that was originally proposed by the billionaire Clive Palmer. I actually found its YouTube channel. The last video was uploaded around 10 years ago. It's gone through delay after delay. You had the pandemic, although I don't even think the pandemic would have made a difference. This project virtually dead. But the real question is, will a Titanic 2 ever be made? And yes, I do think it's inevitable. The original price estimate on a replica of the original Titanic was about $500 million. That was back in 2012. You factor in inflation and how crazy that's gotten. When it comes to USD, I would say it's probably around 750 million. And that's no small amount. But if you're talking about the right billionaire with a crazy idea, a replica Titanic could certainly be done. And I do think there's a market for it. The real question becomes, how would it be made? And we'll take a look at some of the Blue Star Line photos in comparison to the original Titanic. The interesting thing is the second and third class staterooms. The question becomes, do you intertwine modern technology with the Titanic, or do you go for a full realistic effect back to 1912? It's interesting because the Titanic was known as the most luxurious ship of all time. Would you want to replicate that and bring in the technology to 2023, or would it be more of a museum type thing? I guess my biggest question, what is who is paying for a third class cabin on this newer Titanic? It's hard because it's obviously 1912, 2023. The standards are a lot different. There are luxurious rooms when you're talking about modern cruise ships. But just in general, looking at the third class rooms on the Clive Palmer replica, it's the exact same thing. And would someone really be interested in paying money to stay in a room like that with no technology? Is it a one-time deal? What's the market for it? If something like this actually gets built, I would suggest that they'll probably do around like a year or so of travel, and then possibly it would be like a floating museum. Just because I don't know the viability of people actually staying in these horrible rooms. I mean, it's great for history. I would love to do it once, but it's like, listen, with the technology we got now, with people being obsessed with their phones, is there a way to have a modern, classic kind of ocean liner type like Titanic while also bringing in modern technology, but keeping it kind of in the background to allow for a more modern experience while also having, the historic facts, and you've got the grand staircase? That would be very easy. Separating the classes gets a little difficult depending. Historically, you would do first class, second class, third class. With the cruise ships, normally it's like, well, do you have a bigger suite with like 3 or 4 bedrooms versus the common double? But yeah, it'll be interesting with the Titanic too. I think it can certainly happen. There is a big market for it. You also have some people probably scared off by the idea. People say it's disrespectful to, the people that died in the original Titanic. I actually think it's the opposite. When you think about it, we want to prolong the Titanic. If you take a look at what they're saying about the original Titanic, on the seabed, it's got about 15 years left, supposedly, according to the scientists, before it collapses on itself. So if you want to preserve it, this can be a way to actually do that. But there is the issue where people get scared off. People say, listen, it was a disaster. You can't really come back and make that after so many people died. It would be kind of mocking them. I don't buy that at all, but I do understand that could be possibly a concern. But just looking at these designs, I guess the biggest issue is just how big of a market is there for a ship like this, and how many times would people go on it? And if you're, crammed in those smaller rooms, it's hard to really gauge how big the market is. and how much people would sacrifice the modern luxury for, a historic event like Titanic II. And according to the, renderings back in 2012, 2013, the first class, second class, third class dining rooms all be exactly the same. I think you could certainly do something like that. I don't think any of the dining was necessarily terrible. It's very similar to like a 5-star restaurant, first class. I mean, the first class dining room on Titanic, you're just not going to see anything like that on these modern cruise ships. It's all buffets. It's all jam food down your throat. That is fine dining. That is, you've got like 10 courses and they all serve them to you. And it is absolutely, that's something that we would want to experience. But just in general, the last update I could get, I know a lot of people are kind of focusing again on the Titanic with, what was it, the BBC YouTube video coming out, and they've got the 3D view. One of the interesting things with the wreck, they actually cannot get to the pool. It's completely blocked off, I believe, one way by a watertight door. And Cameron, when they went down to explore it for the movie, and others, since then, cannot get to the pool area. The pool area might be preserved relatively well. And then there was the idea, of course, raising the Titanic. That's just not possible. The thing would fall apart. There's just too much pressure on it so far down in the Atlantic. If you brought it up, it would completely collapse and it would be insanely hard. You're better off spending that money the amount it would cost would be ridiculous, but you're better off spending that money on a replica version. And I think as more time passes, we will see an eventual Titanic II. Again, the big question, do you bring any form of technology into it, or is it the exact same as a true replica? Which, if it is the exact same as a replica, I do think it would have to be a floating museum at some point, because you would not be able to get enough people to kind of have that third class experience, even though it is historically accurate in 2023. So much of us, the dopamine, it's crazy. We want constant rewards. You put people on that, it completely wipes out any families because the kids aren't going to want to go on it. It limits the overall chances. If you do bring the technology into it in some way, just small, you could create a nice ocean line type hybrid cruise ship that looks exactly like the Titanic and maybe have the best of both worlds, combining old with the new. You get the old architecture, you get the grand staircase, you get everything with also the modern technology, but limit the technology and keep it, very, very on the download, like, small TVs, things like that, and really focus on the ship. I do think there is a bigger demographic that would want something like that when it comes to an ocean liner. We see all these cruise ships and, they're just disgusting to look at. There's just no other way around it. They look like floating apartment buildings. I'm sure they're very fun. You go on a cruise ship, of course it's fun. You're on a floating, big yacht in the middle of the ocean. People always talk about it. I get it. But they just look hideous. You can't deny that. And apparently, I was reading an article, the newest, biggest cruise ship, which is, I'm guessing this cruise ship had to have been designed before the pandemic, because all of these cruise lines got nailed by the pandemic. They just got crushed. But the biggest cruise ship is being built right now, and it's scheduled to set sail, I believe, in 2024. Which is just a carbon copy of all the other ones. They throw a apartment building on top of a ship and there it is. That's the result. So you've also got like the pools and things like that. I get it. But there has to be a market for an ocean liner like Titanic II. Make the replica, maybe bring in some technology, but keep it low. And you could possibly do something like that. But the other update on the Chinese model, the Chinese model is crap. It is. The Chinese had a big issue dealing with the pandemic. They did not handle it the right way. And they've got several mega projects that we have no clue what's going on with China. They're delayed. They've got a super stadium that's been delayed for a while that we can't get any updates on. They've got this Titanic that was updated in 2021. They said on their Facebook that the construction was ongoing, but for all we know, it could be, just rusting right now in a shipyard. That's more of a floating museum where it's not going to go anywhere. That does not interest me because it's not the exact same. I guess technically the Titanic II isn't the exact same either because you need more space for the lifeboats, and you either expand the ship and give it more deck for the lifeboats, which the Clive Palmer model didn't want to do that. That's why you see the lifeboats under, I believe it's B deck or C deck, and they have to throw them down there because they need more room for the lifeboats. And then people criticize the Titanic and say, well, why didn't it not have enough lifeboats? That was completely common back then. Titanic was not the only ship that didn't have the proper amount of lifeboats for the passengers. No one thought it would sink. That's just the times. But then people want to modern logic. No one had the correct amount of lifeboats. That was just how it was. But either way, I do want to see something like this happen. It would be historic to see. And at some point, maybe as the time gets more past, maybe as the ship keeps deteriorating in the bottom of the ocean, people will be more inclined to try and preserve the history of Titanic by building a replica model. The only question is, does technology come into it? And, you have all the same features, the grand staircase, the cafe, the private promenade decks. You would want all of those. Of course, the private promenade decks, let's be honest, none of us could afford them. But still, you would want it because it is the Titanic, and that's how the ship was. So I do eventually think it will get built in some form. I mean, let's be honest, this is not terraforming Mars. This is not going to cost $15 trillion. You're looking at a max cost of around $1 billion. Yes, that's a lot, but if you have the right person that's really obsessed with the Titanic, it can absolutely be done. The only issue would be people coming out and saying, oh, you're mocking the people, that died. And I don't think that's what it is at all. I think it's trying to preserve the legacy of it. And the idea that this ship only sailed once, it's crazy. So we'll have to see what happens with the Titanic II. There's also a new movie that I want everyone to check out. 666. I saw that on social media. Isn't that great? Yeah, I'm sure that's real good. I believe the premise is it is the third Titanic and it's haunted. And what happens? I'm sure it sinks. And then I saw this article. This is a very sad. Somebody spends 11 years building a 100-foot model of the Titanic for a museum. And then it recently got resurfaced 12 years later. And that's the update to it. That reminds me of the Raising the Titanic model that got abandoned as well. That's a huge model right there. That is impressive. But so there is also that. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.